Divine Retribution. A sermon by Jonathan Edwards. Matthew chapter 25, verse 46. These shall go away into everlasting punishment. In this chapter we have the most particular description of the day of judgment of any kind that we have in the whole Bible. Christ here declares that when he shall hereafter sit on the throne of his glory, the righteous and the wicked shall be set before him, separated, one from the other, as a shepherd divides the sheep from the goats. Then we have an account of how both will be judged according to their works, how the good works of the one and the evil works of the other will be rehearsed, and how the sentence shall be pronounced accordingly. We are told what the sentence will be on each, and then, in the verse of the text, we have an account of the execution of the sentence on both the righteous and the wicked. In the words of the text is the account of the execution of the sentence on the wicked or the ungodly, concerning which it is my purpose to observe two things: the duration of the punishment on which they are here said to enter. It is called everlasting punishment. The time of their entrance on this everlasting punishment, that is, after the day of judgment, at the end of the world, when all these things that are of a temporary continuance shall have come to an end, and even those of them that are most lasting, the frame of the world itself, the earth which is said to abide forever, the ancient mountains and everlasting hills, the sun, moon, and stars, when the heavens shall have waxed old like a garment, and as a vesture shall be changed, then shall be the time when the wicked shall enter on their punishment. The doctrine is this: the misery of the wicked in hell will be absolutely eternal. There are two diverse opinions that I mean to oppose in this doctrine. One is that the eternal death that wicked men are threatened with in the Scripture signifies no more than eternal annihilation, that men will be the subjects of eternal death, as they will be slain, and their life finally and forever extinguished by God's anger, that God will punish their wickedness by eternally abolishing their being, and so that they shall suffer eternal death, in the sense that they shall be eternally dead and nevermore come to life. The other opinion which I mean to oppose is that though the punishment of the wicked shall consist in a sensible misery, yet it shall not be absolutely eternal, but only of a very long continuance. Therefore, to establish the doctrine in opposition to these different opinions, I shall undertake to show, first, that it is not contrary to the divine perfections to inflict on wicked men a punishment that is absolutely eternal. Second, that the eternal death which God threatens is not annihilation, but an abiding sensible punishment or misery. Third, that the misery will not only continue for a very long time, but will be absolutely without end. And fourth, that various good ends will be obtained by the eternal punishment of the wicked. 1. I am to show that it is not contrary to the divine perfections to inflict on wicked men a punishment that is absolutely eternal. This is the sum of the objections usually made against this doctrine, that it is inconsistent with the justice and especially with the mercy of God. And some say, if it be strictly just, how can we suppose that a merciful God can bear to eternally torment his creatures? I shall briefly show that it is not inconsistent with the justice of God to inflict an eternal punishment. To evince this, I shall use only one argument, that is, that sin is heinous enough to deserve such a punishment, and such a punishment is no more than proportionable to the evil or demerit of sin. If the evil of sin be infinite, as the punishment is, then it is manifest that the punishment is no more than proportionable to the sin punished, and is no more than sin deserves. And if the obligation to love, honor, and obey God be infinite, then sin, which is the violation of this obligation, is a violation of infinite obligation, and so is infinite evil. Again, if God be infinitely worthy of love, honor, and obedience, then our obligation to love, honor, and obey Him is infinitely great. So then, God being infinitely glorious, or infinitely worthy of our love, honor, and obedience, our obligation to love, honor, and obey Him, and so avoid all sin, is infinitely great. Sin is the violation of infinite obligation, and so is an infinite evil. Once more, sin, being an infinite evil, deserves an infinite punishment, and infinite punishment is no more than it deserves. Therefore, such punishment is just, which was the thing to be proved. There is no evading the force of this reasoning, but by denying that God, the sovereign of the universe, is infinitely glorious, which I presume none of my hearers will venture to do. 2. I am to show that it is not inconsistent with the mercy of God to inflict an eternal punishment on wicked men. It is an unreasonable and unscriptural notion of the mercy of God that He is merciful in such a sense that He cannot bear that penal justice should be executed. This is to conceive of the mercy of God as a passion to which His nature is so subject that God is liable to be moved, affected, and overcome by seeing a creature in misery, so that He cannot bear to see justice executed. This is a most unworthy and absurd notion of the mercy of God, and would, if true, argue great weakness. It would be a great defect, and not a perfection in the sovereign and supreme judge of the world, to be merciful in such a sense that He could not bear to have penal justice executed. It is a very unscriptural notion of the mercy of God. The Scriptures everywhere represent the mercy of God as free and sovereign, not that the exercises of it are necessary so that God cannot bear that justice should take place. The Scriptures abundantly speak of it as a glory of the divine attribute of mercy, that it is free and sovereign in its exercises, not that God cannot help but deliver sinners from misery. This is a mean and most unworthy idea of the divine mercy. It is also as absurd as it is contrary to plain fact, for if there be any meaning in the objection, this is supposed in it, that all misery of the creature, whether just or unjust, is in itself contrary to the nature of God. For if His mercy be of such a nature that a very great degree of misery, though just, is contrary to His nature, then it is only to add to the mercy, and then a less degree of misery is contrary to His nature, again to add further to it, and a still less degree of misery is contrary to His nature. And so, the mercy of God being infinite, all misery must be contrary to His nature, which we see to be contrary to fact, for we know that God in His providence doth indeed inflict very great calamities on mankind, even in this life. However strong such kinds of objections against the eternal misery of the wicked may seem to the carnal, senseless hearts of men, as though it were against God's justice and mercy, yet their seeming strength and the seeming incredibility that God should give over any of His creatures to such a dreadful calamity as eternal, helpless misery and torment, altogether arises from a want of a sense of the infinite evil, odiousness, and provocation that there is in sin. Hence, it seems to us not suitable that any poor creature should be the subject of such misery, because we have no sense of anything abominable and provoking in any creature answerable to it. If we had, then this infinite calamity would not seem unsuitable, for one thing would but appear answerable and proportionable to another, and so the mind would rest in it as fit and suitable, and no more than what is proper to be ordered by the just, holy, and good governor of the world. That this is so, we may be convinced by this consideration, that is, when we hear or read, as sometimes we do, of very horrid things committed by some men, as, for instance, some horrid instance of cruelty to a poor innocent child, or some holy martyr, or when we read or hear how such and such persons delighted themselves in torturing them with lingering torments, and what terrible distress the poor innocent creatures were in under their hands for many days together, and their cruel